Good evening. You're either watching or listening to Redwood Wonk. My name is Eric Kirk. I'm with David Frank. We are talking national political news of the day, and we can't seem to get the Republicans out of our front pages, so to speak. But we had a debate last week, the first debate of the Republican primary. Of course, as we discussed last week, Donald Trump was a no-show. He did a simultaneous, he recorded a debate, an interview with Tucker Carlson earlier, and it was released, or posted so that people could listen to it or watch it simultaneously with the debate. And I know that there were a number of MAGA people who said, the debate was a non-event. I went to the Tucker Carlson interview. So anyway, so those were the two things that were happening. Of course, the debate involved, I think, about 8 candidates, and some people did well, other people's not as well for themselves. In the polling afterwards, a lot of people among Republicans, it appears that Vivek Ramaswamy may have done well for himself. He, of course, was the most overt pro-Trump candidate on the stage, overtly, absolutely said when a young Republican person was asking, what are you going to do about climate change? He was the only one who unequivocally stated that climate change is a hoax. And he was also unequivocally the one who had said that he would pardon Donald Trump if he is elected. So he won himself a lot of points. Some commentators felt like he came across as a lightweight when it came to Ukraine, but it didn't seem to hurt him. And so he was doing pretty well. But other people who fared well, depending on what their goals were, I'm going to say Chris Christie. He didn't fare well in the polling, but he is there for one purpose only, and that is to attack and take down Donald Trump. He appears to be a never-Trumper candidate, and he did that fairly well. And he also, in doing so, pumped up Mike Pence and said that he did his self a service, and then several other candidates said that Pence did the right thing, which is something that may or may not hurt them in the long run if they are to move forward. The other candidate who may have done well for herself was Nikki Haley. She went toe to toe, probably seemed like the smartest candidate up there in terms of policy. Who did not distinguish themselves well, in my opinion. I think Scott really didn't do what he needed to do. Nobody noticed him, and neither did either of the two candidates who barely got in there, Hutchison and Burgum. I don't even know if I'm leaving somebody out, but if I did, it probably means they didn't do well. So we'll talk about that and where they're at. It does appear that Trump has lost a few points in a poll, about 6 points in a poll from a month ago. And was it because he sat out the debate? Or is it because of the mugshot? And we can talk about the mugshot too, and whether or not the mugshot is good or bad for him depends on who you are. MAGA loves it. Well, everybody loves it for different reasons. But Dave, I'm going to let you in here.
Yeah, thanks for that setup. I think you did hit everybody, although I don't recall what you said about DeSantis.
Oh, DeSantis. I did miss him, and I think he didn't do himself any favors.
Yeah.
But,
yeah. So I think I'm in alignment with you almost down the board here. Trump, because he didn't participate, according to, there's lots of polling out there. There's lots of sources you could go to. But one of the ones that I checked out, I think it was 538. If I remember correctly, and it did show that Trump of the people, it was on Real Clear Politics, I think, of the people who were interviewed, candidates they were considering after the election, or after the debate that they weren't considering before the debate, Trump actually went backwards a little bit. And in part, I think that was the nature of the question. He didn't participate in the debate, therefore he couldn't possibly have gained from it. You read into that what you want, but he still stayed in that 60 6% or 65% range. He's
Yeah.
also polling in the low to mid 50s in other polls. So he didn't really hurt himself that much. He was sort of the elephant not in the room, I've heard people say, because he wasn't there. But with the people who were there, my conversation with you last week was that we could expect people like Ramaswamy and also Tim Scott to maybe capitalize on some of the momentum they had going into the debate. But it was a tale of two cities there. Ramaswamy got all the attention and he got the name recognition, although arguably he kind of sort of jumped the shark a little bit early because he was picking fights with everybody and he was argumentative and he almost seemed a little bit too I don't want to say amateurish. That's not exactly the right word, but he wasn't presidential.
No.
He was more in a troll mode, poking at the bear. Anybody who would argue with him, he was arguing.
But here's the question for me: does he look vice presidential for Trump?
I don't think he does. I think that everybody else on the stage did themselves at least a little bit better than they were, and by a very other than the two that you mentioned, Hutchinson and Burgum. Like I think they were like non-entities there, and I think that they won't be in this race for much longer. I think Tim Scott did not enough to even tread water, barely. Like he didn't show much.
Can you even remember anything he said?
No. Minimal. No, it's platitudes. Yeah. But so the people that really stood out, like again, DeSantis, I don't think DeSantis did anything to advance his cause at all, although he hung in there and he expressed himself. He didn't do any harm. And in that poll that I was talking about in the beginning, he did. More people are considering him now than were before. He moved in the same universe as Trump. So he's looking a little bit more presidential to those people, those 5% of people that now started looking at him, which is like 1 out of 20. But the people, like I think Nikki Haley, I think she did the most to show. I said last week I didn't think she had it in her, and I was wrong. I think she does have it in her, actually, as a former governor and as a former UN ambassador. She showed that she actually, when pushed, she can articulate her policy vision well, and so that's standard.
Anybody paying attention to the substance, she really took Ramaswamy apart on Ukraine. I mean, just to pieces.
Very much so.
But if you're not really paying attention to the substance, you might not think that.
Yeah, that was a big one though, and it was a message that somewhere around a third of the party didn't want to hear. But
right.
I think that did her a solid in the big picture. And I think Pence, speaking of doing a solid in the big picture, while he's still down at the lower end of the popularity spectrum, he did enough to show that he's vigorous and still has what it takes in the arena. I didn't think he would rise to the occasion, but he definitely did.
Well, he got help from the other candidates who all said he did the right thing, and then he turned it into a religious thing, and it was and of course, from my perspective, it looked performative, but that's who he is.
And the crowd was already kind of getting involved because of how Ramaswamy was like really hyping people up and causing fights, and people were enjoying. People in the crowd appeared to be enjoying that aspect of it. When Pence said that he prayed for the country or prayed for the peaceful transfer of power, the crowd booed.
Yeah.
Which I thought was really, kind of compared to the other positivity of his messaging and support from colleagues on the stage. That was something of note. And I didn't mention Christie yet. I think that Christie, he did what we expected him to do. He did it very well. But the question is, to what end, knowing that he is targeting Trump and that he's in that 5% popularity range and that Trump is in the 55% popularity range. So if he's playing the long game, that's one thing. He's actually starting to establish his bona fides and his position of condemnation about Trump's behavior on January 6th and throughout the election. So he didn't do himself a disservice. I think he was articulate. So all in all, it was one of those events where I don't think that, no one was really disqualified, but I think Ramaswamy will, even though he had the most energy and even though he had the most press, in fact, his answers were provocative. and arguably sort of missed the mark in many ways when it comes to being presidential.
I agree. A few other notes I want to make on it. One is my prediction when everybody was saying, "Oh, woke was going to be said more than 40
You nailed.
times." I,
You nailed it. It
it
was said
was
only once, right?
it only once it came. It was Nikki Haley said it, and even she kind of just said it in passing. I think that whole theme, at least for the time being, is dead. So there was that. I think that there was a couple of moments I noticed. One was DeSantis is in an interesting position with regard to climate change, and there was a point where one of the moderators wanted a raise of hands for candidates who believe that climate change is human, caused by humans, and he cut her off and said, "We're not in grade school here, blah blah blah." He did not want to have to be put in a position to raise his hand on that because Florida is being hit really hard, probably more than a lot of other states, by climate change. So he's dealing with the reality of it, but he knows he can't win if he had to raise his hand for that. So he's got a real problem in both ways. So he did not want that to happen, and he got in the way of it right then and there. That panic, he just revealed a very weak point because the Democrats, if he ever becomes a candidate, are just going to hammer him on that. He's afraid of it. So anyway, the other issue, real quickly, is that when asked if Trump was whether or not they would support Trump if he was convicted, everybody raised their hands except for Ice Hutchinson. Christie sort of raised his hand, then later denied he was raising his hand. That kind of weakened Christie a little bit there. He should have been firm and ready for that. But anyway, but again, so the question is where the Republicans are at. Of course, the Trump stole the news the next day with his mugshot. And whether it looks good or bad or hurts them or helps them, it depends on with what crowd. He's selling T-shirts. He's raised over 7 million on it. Other people are. It's also going to be a scene of endless memes. What is your comment on the mugshot and whatever happened there in Georgia?
Well, so it was really interesting to see that he postured and posed, and he had definitely practiced and come dressed up in the performative, the requisite blue jacket, red tie. I think that everybody wore on the stage, the power outfit, if I remember correctly. But
Right.
I heard one commentator say that it's going to be the image we remember him by forever. Because of how iconic it appears to be at this stage. Obviously, history will be written many moons from now. But two things come to mind about this. One is that somebody had commented that it is the Stanley Kubrick crazy character pose.
Yeah, you look at head tilted down. There's a bunch of characters, Jack Nicholson,
and The Shining,
and the guy from Clockwork Orange.
Exactly, yeah. McDowell, right? So the people have said that like again, it was almost an iconic image. I laugh about it a little bit, but in reality, it's a little disturbing, I guess. That's going to be how he's remembered in posterity. His sort of standoffishness and the fact that he's fundraising on it too. We heard he raised $7 million once he published it, asking for help for the legal defense fund. And I saw Don Jr. give a pitch last night where he said, "Hey, there's a lot of people making a lot of money on Trump merch, and none of it's going to the legal fund or the reelection campaign. So we're going to sell our own so that we can channel all that money to the legal fund and the reelection campaign." So it's there's an opportunism there that it's undeniable. But that said, they're going to rack up many millions of dollars of legal fees. So whatever angle they can get out of it, I'm not going to hold it against him. He did show up. He did get arrested. He does have a mugshot. It is public. They're going to try to spin it the best they can.
Obviously. I mean, and where the race is at, it's still his race to lose at this point. I don't really see that the debate changed any dynamics. It did give some other candidates a little bit of an opportunity to show who they are, but I don't see any of them catching up to Trump. I think a lot of the Trump people who watched liked Ramaswamy. That's why everybody's saying he won, because he was the most pro-Trump on the stage there. And the rest, everybody else wants to avoid talking about him, and they can't. He, like I said, yeah, the non or the elephant not in the room. I mean, that's it. And there are even shots on Twitter of like Carrie Lake with her phone watching the interview, the Tucker Carlson interview, which I did not watch. I've seen clips from it, but it's just it's a bit much. But but apparently got a lot of hits, or at least the Twitter post got a lot of hits. I have no idea how many people actually watched it, or if that's data is even available. But out of time on this one. We'll have plenty of time to discuss where the Republican race is at,
Yeah.
but I think Trump is winning.
Good evening. Today, an indictment was unsealed, charging Donald J. Trump with conspiring to defraud the United States, conspiring to disenfranchise voters, and conspiring and attempting to obstruct an official proceeding. The indictment was issued by a grand jury of citizens here in the District of Columbia, and it sets forth the crimes charged in detail. I encourage everyone to read it in full. The attack on our nation's capital on January 6, 2021, was an unprecedented assault on the seat of American democracy. As described in the indictment, it was fueled by lies. Lies by the defendant targeted at obstructing a bedrock function of the U.S. government, the nation's process of collecting, counting, and certifying the results of the presidential election.
Which brings us to what the impact of all of these legal issues is going to be. He is facing a very rough trial calendar coming up. I believe he has something coming up in October, but I couldn't find that. But he has got, just as the primary calendar is coming up, if you are a pro-Trump conspiracy theorist, you got to believe that this was all timed. And I'm listening to right-wingers saying, yeah, why did they wait 3 years to file these charges? Of course, it takes a while for these things to happen. But January 15th, it's actually a civil suit. Jean Carroll, the second civil defamation trial begins, because as soon as he lost that case, he went right to onto a show and trashed her again. January 23rd, possible New Hampshire primary. I guess that's up in the air. February 8th, Nevada caucuses. South Carolina primary, February 24th. I mean, I'm not going to go through it all. But then March 4th is set the Washington, D.C. Trial in terms of the election interference criminal charges. It's the day before Super Tuesday, we talked about, and this was a date Jack Smith wanted a January date, actually, and the Trump lawyers argued for 2006. Judge literally laughed that one out, and set it for March 4th. And I thought, that's really weird, putting it the day before Super Tuesday. But he's got another trial, the hush money trial in New York on March 25th, and then the classified documents trial on May 20th. And they haven't even set the Georgia trial yet. So he's going to be having trials going on through the whole primary season. Is this going to help him or hurt him? I guess is it? I don't know. I'm saying maybe it depends on the verdicts, but does it even depend on the verdicts? I don't know. But this is definitely the weaponization. You heard the term weaponization at the debate last week. Only two of the candidates said explicitly that they wouldn't support him if he was convicted of any felonies. But we've got this happening, and meanwhile, other defendants are moving to have their trials heard sooner. And the motion was heard to move some of the cases to federal court. That was taken under submission. We're not sure what's going to happen. So a lot up in the air. But the question is how are these trials going to affect Trump's campaign, either the primaries or the general election?
So again, as always, thank you for the setup. There's a lot in there. There's a couple different lanes here, but let's start with big picture. I think that there's sort of a consensus amongst analysts that really what the courts ought to do is balance the demand and the need for accountability with his right to a fair and speedy trial. Now, there's just a lot of trials that are stacking up in the same 15-month period, and that happens to coordinate, 3 months down the road, 4 months down the road, we're actually going to have our first primary. So as these things build up momentum over the coming months, I think you're going to hear the language get more vitriolic and be a little bit more contentious. Like, for example, JD Vance said that this was straight up election interference. But there's other people that are more moderate in tone that just say, look, he'll be able to do both. He's got his own plane. He can sit in court in the daytime, hop on the plane at 4:30, go do a rally in the evening. He typically only does a couple of rallies a week anyway. So it's not like he really is going to, like leading up to Super Tuesday, for example, that long list of states that are on that day. I think it's like 16 states or something, if I remember correctly. 16 primaries are on Super Tuesday, including California, which affects us. So folks are going to say, well, that trial date, the day before, is just pure politics. But in fact,
it would have been worse if it was 2 weeks before.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Exactly that too.
And in fact, there's very unlikely to be anything explosive happening on the first day, so it's probably not going to have any impact one way or another, other than just the general news of it on Super Tuesday. So I think the timing is coincidental. But if she really wanted to hurt his chances and thought that the trial would do it, she would have set it for late January or mid-February.
And so there are a couple more pieces here that I thought were really interesting. One's political. It's from rather than talk about Senator Vance or moderates, let's talk for a minute about progressives, right? So Ro Khanna came out and he said that he thinks, and he was on a conservative talk show host, Hugh Hewitt. He was on his show, and he said that Trump is entitled to run an effective campaign. And that so once it's clear that he's the GOP candidate and he's the winner, that he expects trial calendars will be adjusted accordingly. And that's just sort of a general fairness that we have as a country.
But the interesting thing is, and of course there wasn't somebody there to ask Ro Khanna this, is that the judge in the Washington case said, I'm not going to treat him any differently than I would a professional sports person who had a sports schedule. I mean, that would also be unfair to them, right? If they had to have a trial. Why should I treat this any differently? So it'll be interesting. I should also point out that trials very often don't go when the first time they're set. They often get put off. I think that they're setting them just so that they don't get set too far down the road. Yep. So they expect that there'll be a motion to continue it, and very often they're granted. But go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, that's okay. So the other thing I think is really relevant here is U.S. District Judge Tanya Chutkan. I've heard and seen people talking about how this is really important for the legitimacy of the courts, this trial, this case, for the Justice Department and the courts both. So she's not coming to these decisions in a vacuum. She's actually connecting with her peers, other judges, so much so that there are other judges that are witnessing, that are sitting in on the events of this case. So it's she can then sort of preempt, or at least plan to address or mitigate the risk of that somehow this case is going to be lost or dismissed on appeal. So it's not just her legal mind, it's the entirety, this collaboration of a peer group from the U.S. District Court to make sure that they're sort of beyond reproach. I thought that was that I hadn't heard that before. But this other piece, which I think you'll know more about, obviously, because you're a lawyer, but that the Trump is in federal court. The idea is like, why would he try to move to federal court? Why did Meadows try to move to federal court? We talked about this a little bit, but I looked into it since the last time we talked about it. And I think it's called getting rid of the case on motion practice. I'm quoting from a lawyer, attempt to have charges dismissed, claim immunity for his role because he was serving in an official federal capacity. But then what would be the benefit of him doing this? Why is he trying to do it? This is the case down in Georgia. The benefit of a federal jury pulling from friendly or more conservative counties north of Atlanta, that could really benefit them, even though it's going to be the same state procedural process, meaning it could still be on TV. It'll just be in a different building about a block away between the state and federal courts. And then also, if Meadows loses this, it's automatically appealable. The other piece of this that I'll mention real quickly,
you go ahead.
Yeah, is that Trump is in a holding pattern about whether he can try to file to move to federal court or not. And it looks like he's waiting to see what happens in the Meadows case, because he obviously would benefit from that more conservative jury pool also.
Yeah, I mean, there is also the testing of the question as to whether or not Trump can pardon himself, right? And so he can't pardon himself or anybody from a conviction in state court. That would be a violation of the 10th Amendment. He can't interfere with that. So moving into federal court, if he can pardon people if he's president, and so he could pardon Meadows, whether or not he could pardon himself, that remains to be seen. But it is interesting as to what's going to happen. I would point out that the trial that I think he has the biggest chance of getting convicted on is the last one that's on the list, May 25th, closer to the convention, and that's the classified documents case. I actually don't see what his defense is, quite frankly. And the others are tricky on a number of ways, especially the hush money one. And the hush money one, of course, though, even if he is convicted, it's not something that's going to get anybody all that excited. It's not. He'll probably get fined. So it's not that big a deal, and it's got a felony on his record. But we already have a jury that found that he fingered somebody forcefully, right? And so if they're not excited about that jury verdict, they're not going to be excited about whether or not he funneled money the wrong way and didn't account for it. I mean, it's just that's just not going to get anybody excited. But and now there are rumors of Arizona, a fifth indictment possibly going to happen. So, but I think they'd be looking towards the fall during the general election. And it is very possible that one or two of these trials will get put off till 2025, and then and if he's president, they won't happen right away. They'll get put off.
I got a couple other things we could address here that fall into the same calendar topic. One is that you mentioned that documents trial is going to start around May
25th.
Yeah. By then, Trump might have already locked up enough of the delegates that he's already.
He should have. It'll be done one way or another by then, because there's only like 5 primaries left after that, and they're all in small states.
And then there's the convention in July where they'll actually, I still think, people joke around about that. I still think there could be some shenanigans in July if something happens between when he locks it up and then, how the cases have unfolded by then. But that I just figured that, just to point out that it's all going to happen pretty fast, January through May. But the other side of the spectrum, the end of it, well, let's talk about the beginning of it. So October 24th is, just a couple months away here now. And that's Chesborough's date that was actually put on the calendar. And there's a little bit of maneuvering that we could report on this week, which is the DA, what she put forward was basically a prod to, she indicated she's ready to proceed with all 19 defendants on that date. So it's, sort of prompting the judge to move forward with scheduling. So now the judge, I don't know exactly how the scheduling works, but there's 19 counselors out there for each of these defendants. And the question is going to be for the judge to kind of see how she can manage the case of determining if there's going to be any severance happening, severing certain people off of Cheeseborough's court date. And of course, Trump is one of the key people to keep in mind. And so we'll see how this plays out.
Yeah, I don't know how Georgia law works in terms of co-defendants on that. They like to keep them in the same place if it's all the same actions. But in California, you can make an argument to separate it if being together prejudices one or the other. And quite frankly, if I was one of those defendants, I might not want to be sharing the trial with Donald Trump. I do not want to go down with that ship. And so, but I don't know, maybe a lawyer would figure, hey, they'll probably, maybe they just let me go. I don't know. It just depends. I don't know if you saw some of those other mug shots, but some of them look kind of scary.
Yeah.
I mean, it's really strange. Like the woman who was the PR person for Kanye. I mean, she looked demonic in her thing. I mean, it's just really odd. The attorneys all look scared. I mean, I noticed that in the shots. Some of the others maybe don't realize quite how serious this is. And at any rate, this is a big deal. And the polls seem to be indicating that that non-Republican leaning independents are not going to want to vote for Trump, whether or not they would have in 2016. They just don't want this chaos. A lot of the same people who voted against Hillary Clinton because that whole thing that exploded at the last minute with the FBI, it was just they don't want the chaos. They want some governing to happen, and he's not known for governing. I was watching Stephen Schmidt, who's like one of the primary never-Trumpers, a former Bush person, has his podcast, and he had Ken Burns, documentarian, on, and they're both talking about what MAGA represents, and they're like saying it's not even an ideology. There's no policy. There's no ideas about it. It's just Trump. That's it. He is the ideology. He's the end goal. And this is a scary moment. And so if you believe that he is the end, then these trials are the deep state trying to get him.
So I'd like to pick up on that last piece. I know we just have a couple minutes left, but I didn't make this up. There's been many people saying it, that Trump appears to be a cult of personality. And that's what, reason and thoughtful policy consideration is not the strong suit of people explaining why they support him. I want to just talk about that Venn diagram where we cross over politics and the legal proceedings. In the scheduling of the federal court case in U.S. District Court in D.C., some of the things that Trump's lawyers were saying was more speaking to the audience, to the political audience, compared to the legal system. They were setting up the pretext that that Trump was now facing an unfair trial because he didn't have the right to sufficient time to prepare. That politics, reprisal for Hunter Biden investigation was the reason of this case. And also that he should have immunity because the fact that he was president, serving in his capacity as president. The thing is that it's called an interlocutor appeal that his legal team appears to be setting up. And the problem with that is that it's not an automatic appeal. This is a discretionary appeal that's up to Judge Chutkan if she agrees. And the chances that she agrees that she is putting forward an unfair trial that's biased for political reasons and that it's a witch hunt or some other, the derogatory way of explaining the charges, she's not going to buy into that. She's not going to give the appeal. So I think it's worth pointing out that his legal team is not actually fighting the best fight they could be fighting, if that's the language and that's the angle that they keep trying to come up with.
Yeah, and I'm going to close out. I don't think we have much time here anyway, so I'm going to close out by saying I don't think more than 2 of these trials will actually happen before Election Day. I think it'd be really unlikely that all 4 or all 5 trials go before then.
Yes. Yes, and I will do it on day one. Here's the thing. The cartels are killing tens of thousands of our fellow citizens. You want to talk about a country in decline? You have the cartels controlling a lot of part of your southern border. We have to reestablish the rule of law, and we have to defend our people. The President of the United States has got to use all available powers as Commander-in-Chief to protect our country and to protect the people. So when they're coming across, yes, we're going to use lethal force. Yes, we reserve the right to operate. How many more tens of thousands are we going to let to die? Would I use force? Would I treat them as foreign terrorist organizations? You're darn right I would.
All right, so at the Republican debate, an issue came up that has become a major talking point for Republicans. And obviously, what they're looking to do is hit Joe Biden on the border. Now, border crossings are up again a bit, and they want to make a big deal about that. But is it a crisis? Who knows? But the angle that they are pushing is fentanyl, which is, of course, an epidemic in this country, and a lot of it is coming from Mexico. And a lot of it is crossing over the border. And so when Ramaswamy was saying we need to end the war in Ukraine and put all that military down on the border. I mean, I don't know how, Javelin missiles or anything would be useful down there, but that's what he said. But the rest of them are saying we need to put soldiers down there to stop the fentanyl from coming across. I really want to point out that if you actually, there's some really good writings on this and account as to how fentanyl gets across the border. First of all, it doesn't come across the Rio Grande. People don't put it in their backpack. I mean, some people do. It does happen, but it's like 20 to 1. The fentanyl that's coming into the country is coming through checkpoints, not across the land. It's not a real safe practice to send it across the land. For one thing, you're taking a chance that you're going to get robbed. And for another thing, it's just you've got much more chance of getting caught if you do that than if you come across. Secondly, it's the majority of them are not even of extra national origin. They are Americans, either tourists, many of them fentanyl addicts themselves, going down into Mexico to make a buck. And bringing it back in themselves, sneaking it back in. This is how it's done. And so you can have all the soldiers down there with all the equipment in the world. You can have the wall up. You can have all of that. And even if that was effective at slowing down the undocumented immigration, that way it would barely put a dent, if any, on the fentanyl crossing. They've got actually, based on where they've actually caught things, there's a good map. I recommend, it's just a very short article in, it is NPR, August 9, 2023, Who is Sneaking Fentanyl Across the Southern Border? Hint, it's not the migrants. And there's a map when you scroll down that shows where it's coming across and where it's not. And this is based on U.S. Customs and Border Protection sources. And it's very clear that I won't say the Republican candidates don't understand the problem, but certainly they are banking on the fact that a lot of the people that they're hoping vote for them don't. There's no military solution to this. This is, there may be ways of doing this, maybe more checkpoints with more agents that are trained to be able to pick up on things and to keep things moving without slowing traffic down so much that you're not impacting tourism and other forms of commerce, including supplies and everything coming across. But the fentanyl coming across the border is not going to be solved by the wall, by militarization of the border, certainly not by razor nets in the river.
So you pointed out the same article, one of the same articles that I looked at in preparation for today. I do agree that that map is really key. At the highest level, I'll start where you left off, and then we'll kind of get back into a little bit more of the details, because I think it's really important. The question is, do the Republican presidential candidates understand this? And I think that most of them, if not all of them, they have the capacity to understand, but they are clearly playing dumb for political reasons. They know that a wall or an army can't stop the type of smuggling that all the experts say is happening, but talking tough sells better. It just benefits them in this climate. Like you said, DeSantis has a quote: "We're going to use force and we're going to leave them stone cold dead." Like, he thought that was a great, law and order, talk tough. That gets him far. But who are we actually talking about? So I think that's what's important. And then I'm going to go back to that article that you said, that NPR article. To cut to the chase, they estimate that about 25% of what they what comes across is getting seized. So based on what is getting seized, that's giving them sort of the estimate, the blueprint of how to deal with the problem. And then it's like, this problem is probably about 4 times bigger, right? So what did they find? They found that the vast majority, almost 90% of what they seize are at official border crossings.
Right.
And then, what are they actually seizing? Who is it? It's usually small amounts for people, by people that are just carrying it on their body, or in like a car that they happen to be traveling in. They are already authorized to cross the border. About half of them are U.S. citizens. Nearly the other half is dual nationals or other people that have credentials that are Mexican citizens that are allowed to move freely. And the cartels are very effective at targeting which people to recruit. But the point is,
and real quickly, the article says virtually none is seized from migrants seeking asylum.
I have that exact quote, and you read. That's the next quote I was about to read.
Oh, sorry.
That's okay. That's okay. This is good, because they're finding 0.02% of migrants arrested by Border Patrol possess fentanyl. So the folks that are coming for asylum, the folks that are trying to basically work their way across the border without waiting in line, 0.02%. So that's these people, the migrant community is not they're not the ones who have fentanyl. So the cartels are a lot. They want to make a lot of money. We could talk about that money, but the point is that there's a misconception that the people, like the border, the looseness of the border, the holes in the border, that is what's driving the numbers. And whether it's federal prosecutors, borders and CPB, Custom Border Patrol, Homeland Security, whatever experts testify in front of the government. And I looked at like 4 different testimonies. All of them are saying that these cartels are just using mules. They are not, and those mules are have the credentials they need, and they're going through. I think, not to talk so long, but I think one thing is really important. We could talk about the specifics, but I think this is a key. Reuters analyzed 10 years of data, 85,000 drug seizure events for fentanyl, 2.6 pounds each. That's equivalent of 50,000 doses. And about half of these are in pill form. So what's happened is fentanyl has displaced heroin because of the user and the demand side. Yeah. The users, and we could talk more about that, but the potential for profit here is so immense. That's really what's driving it. We could talk more about the specifics of it, but it's a bit like you can take $800 of precursor chemicals and make over $1 million worth of fentanyl pills. Yeah. So just because the economics of this, the demand is solid, the supply is cheap, it's going to keep happening until we do something different.
I've spoke to a friend who is really up on this stuff. He said even that 0.02% who is crossing the border with it, they probably have no connection with the cartels. Those are probably people who are trying to make a little bit of money on their own, or maybe even bring it for personal use. This is, the cartels would be stupid, he said, to be sending people across the border with that stuff. It would be a waste. They would be, basically they might as well pour it into the river. It is, they get it. And if they are going to send it with a Mexican national, it'll be somebody who's trying to do the slip in, being in the car and hope that they don't, get caught, get searched when they get turned away. But mostly it's tourists, it's Americans, or like you said, dual citizenship. And again, there has to be trained and tracking of the stuff. That's how it's going to have to be dealt with, and it's not a military solution. And even invading Mexico, like some of the Republicans are starting to talk about doing, it is not going to be. I noticed that Trump is not saying that. And Trump is not saying that because he actually made a close alliance with Obrador when he was in office. They're actually, I don't know if they're friends, but they're allies. Obrador was one of the last people to acknowledge that Biden had won the election, one of the last leaders of another country. But other candidates are talking about we should be making incursions into Mexico to put an end to this kind of stuff. But it's just, this is not, that old saying, when your only tool is a hammer, you see every problem as a nail. This is not something that's going to be solved this way. And there needs to be a national discussion as to how it's going to be dealt with. But say you can send all the troops to the border, there was another cartoon that I remember from college on one of my professor's doors with the king sitting there with pictures of Humpty Dumpty saying, but the fact that all my horses and all my men can't put them back together again simply means I need more horses and more men. It's not going to do it. And so but I hope that the Democrats, at least some of them, will come out strong on this, because this is an important issue. People are dying from this stuff. So it's not just important to hit back to win the election. It's important to hit back so that we come up with real policy, real methods, and money towards some type of enforcement program that will actually be effective in tracking the stuff down and stopping it.
So I think part of the problem here is a lot of people, we sensationalize the word fentanyl, right, because we're so frustrated and stressed out about the problem itself, and it seems so challenging. But I don't think people realize it's like an anesthesia. It leaves you anesthetized. It's a synthetic opioid that's 50 times stronger than heroin. And just this year, 2023, so far, and it's not even over yet, we still have another 2 months, there's been a spike of over 50% more seized. 10 tons have been seized this year so far. Sure. So like, what is it, right? Developed in 1959 as an IV anesthetic. It's legal and it's widely used by the medical community to this day. Between 1990 and 2010, hundreds of thousands of Americans got hooked on prescription opioids like OxyContin and Vicodin, but then there was a crackdown, and then there was a black market. Fentanyl started in the black market about 10 years ago. China was sending over to here, but the seizures, that's when the first recorded seizures started on the Mexico border. Since then, there have been 325,000 overdoses involving synthetic opioids, almost all of them fentanyl, which is 7 times more than regular plant-based opioids from heroin. So China was the dominant source until 2019, but China has classified it as a controlled substance. China has cracked down on the distribution. So instead, Mexican cartels filled the gap, and they're actually producing it. And the way they produce it is, it takes a space less than the size of a single car garage. And all this stuff came from Reuters, by the way, that studied 10 years of history, so 10 years of data, just to give them full credit for all this. But what they were saying is it comes from a 1-car garage. Comparable amount of heroin would be a 2-acre poppy field by volume, but by potency, it would be a 100-acre field. So it's much easier for the cartels that have been making money on marijuana and cocaine and heroin, things that they're growing, agricultural crops. It's way easier and way cheaper. Even the precursors are regulated. So now the chemists, what they're doing in Mexico is they're buying the precursors. And it's going to be hard to ban and track these because we're talking about chemicals that go into paint, rubber, herbicides, medicine, ibuprofen. So the ingredients that go into ibuprofen, those are the ones that we're talking about. How do we track them? How do we stop them from getting used in Mexico? And lastly, like I said, that profit margin is 800-fold. 800-fold. The market is $1 billion market, and the Sinaloa and the new generation Jalisco cartels, they are all, that's $1 billion that they want. And finally, one last quote. Bryce Pardo, who is a research officer at United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime, he said, the global production potential for fentanyl is astronomical. As long as precursor chemicals are available, the supply of the drug is virtually endless.
Yeah, I mean, you know, how do we hit it? I don't know. I just know that it's going and putting troops on the border isn't going to do it. And I do think that these policy people and the Republican Party need to be challenged on this. I don't know what, I mean, it's I don't know what goes into it. If certain products can be attacked on it, I don't know. You know, but it doesn't sound like it. With plant-based stuff, you can attack the farms. You can't do that here.
Yeah, so the recommendations are the Border Customs and Border Patrol. What they're saying is they need some more X-ray machines, they need some more density meters, they need some more sniffer dogs. So manpower at the points of entry and technology investments at the points of entry, those are reasonable and you know thoughtful ways to possibly reduce some of what's happening. But just, you know, I know there's a lot of sort of fear mongering about this drug. 2 milligrams is considered a lethal dose, which if you look at it compared to like a nickel is 5 grams. Mm-hmm. So 2 milligrams is like the nose on the face of the, you know, the president on the nickel, right? Like, wow. So it's this tiny little amount could be lethal, and they're coming. It's one of those things that's really tragic and really requires us not to be, you know, alarmist and hyperbolic about it. But that's unfortunately that's where we are.
Eeny, meeny, chili, beany, the spirits are about to speak.
Are they friendly spirits?
Friendly? Just listen.
That brings us to predictions. Dave, what do you have?
This one caught me by surprise. There's a lawsuit out there called National Republican Senatorial Committee versus the FEC, Federal Election Commission, where they're fighting the Republican Senatorial Committee and the Congressional Committee for their re-election arms are fighting against limits on coordinated party expenditures. They're saying that it violates the First Amendment, that it's unconstitutional and unenforceable. Their goal is to strike down the limits, and they say restore power where it belongs. So this is, you know, this is right under the radar. It's the biggest case since Citizens United in 2010. Here specifically, the lawsuit filed in November would eliminate the need for House and Senate campaign committees of any party to set up separate operations to make so-called independent expenditures. In reality, it would allow party officials, committees, and candidates to coordinate freely by removing the restrictions. And so my prediction is that this case will make it to the Supreme Court, who are going to align with the principle that money is speech, and they will actually further strike down the existing campaign finance restrictions on party campaign spending and coordination.
Well, they're already bare bones. Anyways, I've got a real quick one here. Today, Senator Mitch McConnell had another freeze moment, which is really concerning to everybody. He was holding a press conference and he just froze. It was very awkward and very disturbing. And he is up in age. I think he's like one of the longest running senators, or longest running people in Congress, actually. And I am making a prediction here because I think there's going to be some pressure on him. Marjorie Taylor Greene came right out and said he's unfit, right? I mean, there's already going to be pressure on him to step down as minority leader in the Senate. But obviously, for the same reason that Senator Dianne Feinstein can't resign, is everything is so close. You got this 50-50 thing going on, right? That even loss of one senator throws everything off. With Dianne Feinstein, it's the Judiciary Committee. If she leaves, they won't be able to get a replacement and won't be able to pass any judges for the rest of the year, most likely until the next term. So I am predicting that there is actually going to be a discussion between the parties of some type of agreement that allows both Mitch McConnell and Dianne Feinstein to retire with dignity, where they can maintain status quos without losing any ground on their committees and within the Senate. I think there's going to be talks about that.
Yeah, they need it.
Definitely. All right, until next time, stay informed and stay engaged.